The sea was still black when the first engine groaned to life, splitting the silence like a warning shot. Thick mist curled over the harbor, clinging to the cold iron hull of the trawler like a ghost reluctant to let go. Steel boots clanged against the deck. Hands rough as coral cinched tight the ropes, checked each harpoon's glint, counted every bolt, every loop of cable. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. These weren't men going fishing, they were warriors, preparing for a confrontation with something older, stronger, and far less merciful than themselves. Beneath the deck, the winch slowly stirred, an iron beast awakening. The scent of salt and diesel filled the lungs. The sky to the east began to bruise purple. They moved through it like shadows, weather-beaten faces hardened by years of sea salt and silence, eyes locked on the waterline. They were European fishermen. Yes, but more than that, they were descendants of centuries of survival at sea. Every wrinkle on their faces, every scar on their knuckles, bore silent testimony to the battles they'd fought and the monsters they'd met beneath the waves. As the vessel pulled away from the dock, the harbor faded into mist. Out here, language meant little. The sea had its own, and it was always spoken through violence. Every harpoon readied was a promise. Every steel cable coiled on deck was a challenge issued. Ahead of them lay the open Atlantic, cold, gray, and pulsing with life. And somewhere in its depths, the giants waited. By mid-morning, the clouds had scattered, but the air still bit like iron. The trawler cut through the swells like a blade, the horizon stretching in all directions, endless and empty. But beneath the surface, it was anything but. Atop the navigation console, a dull green sonar screen flickered with sudden life. One ping, then another low, deliberate, pulsing like a heartbeat. The men gathered around it instinctively. No one needed to speak. They saw it. The shapes, thick, slow-moving, immense. A school of giants, drifting just beyond sight, like phantoms lurking in the deep. Groupers. Not the kind you see in aquariums or Sunday markets. These were the stuff of nightmares, hundreds of kilos, 3 meters long, with mouths wide enough to swallow a man's leg. And they were rising. The fishermen moved into position, their faces unreadable. This was the moment they had prepared for in silence, in scars, in old memories that surfaced only when the sea called. Harpoons were loaded, lines uncoiled, eyes narrowed. Down below, the water churned softly as if disturbed by the memory of ancient predators. The North Sea held no pity, neither did the men. Somewhere between them and that sonar echo, a collision of worlds was brewing. The steel ship drifted slowly over the blinking signal, and for a breathless second, the sea seemed to hold still. No birds cried, no wind sang. Only the low hum of the sonar and the pounding of their hearts remained. Then a faint shadow passed under the hull, massive, deliberate, otherworldly. And in that moment, every man on board knew the ghosts of the deep had arrived. The first harpoon struck with a violent hiss, slicing the air before vanishing beneath the rolling gray waves. A heartbeat later, the deck jolted. The line snapped, taut like a live wire, rattling through metal loops as the winch screamed in protest. The sea had answered. Below, something vast twisted and turned, dragging with the weight of an underwater avalanche. The cables bent, groaned flesh battling steel in a silent war beneath the surface. The fishermen sprang into motion. Boots skidded across the wet deck. Hands gripped, braced, hauled. Another harpoon flew, then another. The water boiled where it hit, white foam blooming in every direction like an underwater explosion. And still, the beast didn't yield. It pulled back with a force that staggered grown men, arms shaking, spines curved against the drag. This wasn't sport. It was survival. The engine growled louder as the trawler shifted course, trying to steady itself against the sheer strength below. Each man moved on instinct, the rhythm of the sea etched into their muscles. They didn't chase glory, they hunted it with blood and grit. One of the younger men lost his footing. The cable whipped across his shoulder, opening a line of red through his jacket. He didn't flinch, just got up, grabbed the rope again. No one called for help. Out here, pain was part of the dialogue. The grouper fought like a monster possessed, a block of living muscle and rage, forged in the silence of the ocean depths. Its tail thrashed, sending geysers of seawater over the rail. The smell of salt and fear was thick in the air. Somewhere in the chaos, someone shouted, "Hold the line!" And they did, teeth clenched, shoulders burning, vision narrowing. They weren't just hauling in a fish, they were pulling up a myth. The ocean roared back with vengeance. The cable whined until it snapped with a sound like gunfire, whipping through the air and slicing against the mast. Men ducked, cursed, stumbled over wet steel. For a moment, all that remained was silence, the kind that follows a lost battle. The grouper was gone, swallowed again by the gray abyss. Steam hissed from the winch. The air smelled of oil and frustration. One man knelt, panting, staring into the foam where the monster had vanished. His hands trembled not from fear, but fury. They had felt it, the sheer, impossible weight of it. It wasn't just strength that slipped away, it was pride. Yet none of them spoke defeat. The captain's voice finally broke through the wind, low but cutting. "Reload the line." Around him, men moved automatically, eyes still locked on the water. Fingers bleeding, backs stiff, they went again. No complaint, no hesitation. The sea had taken from them, and in return, they would take from it. The rhythm of preparation began anew, cable fed through pulleys, harpoons checked, the heavy thud of boots echoing against the hull. The youngest of them glanced at the horizon where dark clouds gathered, muttering a quiet curse. He'd seen storms before, but not like this. Somewhere beneath the swells, the escaped giant drifted, dragging steel deep into the dark, a silent reminder of nature's defiance. The men didn't know it yet, but this failure would mark them the sting of a lost hunt, etching deeper than any scar. The ocean had shown its teeth, and when it does, only fools believe the fight is over. It struck without warning. A sudden upheaval of water just off the starboard bow, as if the sea itself had been torn open from beneath. A monstrous shadow breached the surface, and gasps rippled across the deck. The creature twisted violently, its scaled body shimmering like molten armor in the fractured sunlight. It was massive, easily 3 meters long, with shoulders thicker than a man's torso and eyes black as the abyss. Its tail whipped the water into a storm, soaking the men in a curtain of foam and salt. No one moved for a second. Then, "Harpoon!" The shout cut through the roar. A spear flew, crashing into the beast's flank with a deep, metallic thunk. The grouper recoiled, twisting in agony, dragging the cable with such force that the entire winch shuddered on its bolts. The deck tipped, boots scrambling for grip. The engine strained as the captain reversed power to compensate. 2 men threw themselves at the rope, their bodies arching back like anchors against a current too wild to name. The monster thrashed again, slamming the side of the boat. A shudder traveled through the hull. This thing could capsize them if it chose to. Blood, dark and slick, clouded the water. But it wasn't slowing down. The harpoon cable groaned with stress. Steel against scale, muscle against will. A second harpoon was readied, aimed, fired. This time, it hit near the gill. The grouper let out a deep, guttural noise. Less a cry than a tremor, felt more than heard. For a moment, it vanished again beneath the surface, trailing ropes like seaweed. Silence fell. The men stood soaked, breathless, muscles trembling from effort and awe. No one said it aloud, but they all knew. This wasn't just a fish. This was the deep come alive. Then came the pull swift, merciless. The rope snapped back into motion, yanking the harpoon rig so hard it ripped through a cleat with a shriek of twisted metal. A fisherman, caught off guard, stumbled and nearly went overboard. Another lunged, grabbed his jacket just in time. Both men collapsed to the deck, panting, soaked, no words, just nods. The grouper had gone deep, dragging steel and rage into the abyss. From the bridge, the captain barked orders, voice hoarse but clear. The engine roared, the winch spinning in reverse. All hands on deck again, scrambling to re-anchor the line before the monster vanished for good. The sea responded with contempt. A sudden wave smashed over the bow, drenching everyone. Another harpoon line whipped loose, the air singing with its velocity. This wasn't a battle anymore, it was retribution. The ocean had decided to fight back. And the men, they stood their ground, knuckles bleeding, eyes locked on the spray where the ropes dove downward, as if staring into the mouth of something ancient and unforgiving. Then a glimmer, a sudden flash of silver in the depths. The grouper surfaced again, only for a moment, but enough. Enough to see that it was bleeding, enough to see that it was slowing. One harpoon had torn loose, the other buried deep in its side. Its movements were slower now, more desperate, but no less dangerous. As it thrashed, a new wave of determination swept the deck. Men rose, hands reached for the winch. The line pulled again, creaking under the strain. They would not let this one go. Not after what it had taken, not after how close it had come to breaking them. The line jerked again, this time with a rhythm that felt slower but no less deadly. The beast was tiring, but so were they. Muscles burned, palms raw and shredded from rope friction. Every inch of cable gained was a battle against gravity and will. The grouper, wounded and furious, rose once more from the deep. Its body was carved by scars now, fresh wounds where steel had pierced, ancient markings from battles long past. The sun, filtering through shifting clouds, caught the shimmer of its torn scales. For a moment, it looked like a relic, something from another age, not meant for men to touch. But the men did not stop. Not for pain, not for awe. The winch screeched, gears grinding against the weight of a creature that refused to die quietly. One of the older fishermen, boots braced wide, leaned into the rope with everything he had. His teeth clenched, breath rasping, eyes locked forward. This was his 5th hunt this season. He'd buried friends who never came back from this ocean. This fight, this moment, it was personal. The grouper surged again, lifting its tail in a final violent arc, slamming against the hull. The vessel rocked hard. A lantern crashed to the deck. Someone shouted to secure the net. Another was already loading the next harpoon. The air thickened with sweat and salt, the wind pushing hard now, as if the ocean itself resented being challenged this long. And yet, the men held. Every scream of steel, every ripple of water, echoed with the same truth. They would not let go. Not now, not with the monster this close. The sea boiled as the grouper breached once more, its head breaking the surface like a submarine rising from the abyss. Its eyes, wide and wild, flashed with primal defiance. Then, for the first time, it slowed. The fight was leaving it. Blood, thick and dark, spilled into the churned-up foam, staining the waves like ink. The winch clanked louder, struggling but steady. With a final, thunderous heave, the crew pulled in unison, backs arched, teeth clenched, every tendon burning. And then, it happened. The grouper broke free of the water completely, crashing onto the steel deck with a sound that silenced the wind. A mountain of muscle and scale lay before them, gasping, twitching, defeated. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, a single voice. We got it. A cheer broke out, raw and guttural, as if the boat itself exhaled relief. Boots stomped, hands clapped shoulders. Laughter strained and stunned echoed across the ship. The beast glistened in the late morning light. Its massive form sprawled like a myth laid bare. Silver scales shimmered with salt, blood, and glory. Cameras clicked. Someone whispered, "That's the biggest one yet." And it was. Nearly 3 meters of ancient power, now tamed by men who knew the price of such victory. No one spoke of danger now. No one asked what came next. In that moment, they were kings of the ocean. Around them, the waves seemed to pause in respect. But the sea does not mourn its fallen, and neither did they. They simply prepared for the next call, the next shadow, the next roar from beneath. Because out here, triumph was never the end. It was only the beginning of another war. Just as the adrenaline faded and the last echo of triumph hung in the air, the sonar pulsed again another signal, low and steady. A new shadow crept across the screen, then 2 more, then 5, a school, bigger, closer. The cheers fell silent, smiles tightened. The men turned back to their stations, hands blistered, arms sore, but hearts steady. Harpoons were reloaded with trembling fingers. The lines, still wet from the last battle, were wound around calloused palms. No time to rest. The sea was giving no mercy today. The captain squinted at the screen, then out into the churning blue, his jaw set like stone. "They're coming fast," he said. The wind had picked up, whistling through the rigging like a warning. Clouds darkened overhead. One man wrapped fresh gauze around a bleeding wrist. Another swigged coffee as if it were war paint. The first grouper had been a titan, but these were a swarm. And the sea, never content with one test, now offered another. They faced the water again, this time with the kind of silence that only comes from men who know what waits. It wasn't fear, it was readiness. The horizon pitched, the boat swayed, and down below, the shadows grew bolder. They came like ghosts, summoned by the scent of blood. And as the deck readied once more for chaos, the men of iron, sea-born and stubborn, braced for another round. Because to them, it wasn't madness, it was duty. Out here, every breath was a challenge, and every challenge an answer to who they truly were. The sea no longer whispered, it growled. Beneath a bruised sky, the ship rolled with deeper purpose, slicing toward the coordinates where the sonar had pulsed last. This time, no one shouted. There were no battle cries, no boasts, just movement deliberate, silent, focused. Every man had entered that strange trance known only to those who've tasted the brink and turned back with scars. Harpoons were locked in, one by one, their steel tips glistening like fangs. Ropes stretched across the deck, coiled like sleeping serpents waiting to strike. Below, the water churned dark forms shifting just out of sight. Then, it began. One, then another. Groupers surged toward the surface, disturbed by blood or drawn by instinct. The air exploded with motion. Harpoons launched like thunderbolts, punching into the depths. The lines screamed. The men held. Rain began to fall. Not gentle, but sharp needles against salt-stung skin. The wind tore across the bow, blinding and brutal. But the fishermen did not yield. Their bodies moved like machinery, practiced and merciless. Each successful hit brought a cheer short, sharp and gone, replaced by another command, another pull. The sea fought harder this time. One of the lines went slack. A fish had escaped. Another cable frayed and snapped, nearly catching a crewman across the thigh. But they kept going. They had crossed into that part of the world where pain becomes rhythm and danger becomes routine. One grouper was dragged aboard, huge, thrashing, tearing nets as it came. Another followed, then another. The deck began to look like a battlefield, wet, red, and full of trophies. But none of them paused. Because in this war between man and beast, the moment you rest is the moment you lose. Then came the one they hadn't expected. Even through the sonar's coarse resolution, they knew it was different. The shape was larger, slower, older. It moved like something that didn't fear the ship above, but watched it, waited. The captain stepped down from the bridge, eyes locked on the monitor. "That's no schoolfish," he muttered. A silence fell that even the wind seemed to respect. Every harpoon was rechecked, every knot pulled taut. Then, the sea broke. It didn't rise, it erupted. A wall of water surged upward as a behemoth breached the surface. The grouper was immense, easily dwarfing the ones before it. Its skin, mottled with pale scars and dark ridges, told stories of decades at war beneath the waves. It turned its head slowly, deliberately, as if acknowledging the challenge before it. One of the oldest crewmen dropped his cigarette, eyes wide. "I've seen that one before," he whispered. 15 years ago. We couldn't land it then. No one questioned him, no one doubted. There was something about this fish, its size, its calm, its presence, that felt almost sacred. A harpoon flew. It hit, but the beast barely flinched. The line pulled, but the grouper didn't dive. It stayed, hovered. Then, with terrifying grace, it moved once and nearly pulled 2 men overboard. Ropes screamed, metal cracked. The deck tilted. Men stumbled. Another harpoon was loaded, this time aimed straight at the gill. "Now!" someone shouted. It flew, a direct hit. The monster flailed, finally enraged. Its tail slammed the surface, sending shockwaves through the boat. The battle for this titan had begun, and every man aboard knew they were no longer fishing. They were confronting a legend. The storm answered the clash. Wind howled through the rigging, flinging salt and rain across the heaving deck. The grouper twisted in the water, an ancient force made flesh, its tail carving trenches through the sea, its head rearing and slamming against the surface like a battering ram. The boat listed hard to port. "Brace!" someone yelled, but it was too late, For one, he slid across the slick deck, slamming into a bulkhead with a grunt. Another scrambled to grab him, slipping, dragging both of them to the railing. Still, they held the line. They always held the line. The winch spun, squealing under the strain, coughing smoke. Sparks flew. The monster had no interest in dying clean. It jerked downward, dragging steel into the deep, but the harpoon cables had locked. Every second felt like an hour. A crewman clambered up to manually reinforce the clamps, his knuckles bleeding as he twisted the bolt with all he had. The captain stood at the helm, soaked to the bone, barking commands through clenched teeth. Below, the grouper breached once more, its body torn, scales shattered, but its eyes still wild, defiant. A third harpoon was launched, sinking deep. The final blow. The beast let out one last surge. The deck groaned beneath them, and then stillness. It floated, lifeless. A leviathan caught. Cheers erupted, but they were hoarse, exhausted. This wasn't joy, it was survival. The crane was lowered, harnesses locked. Slowly, inch by inch, the creature was lifted aboard. Its body thudded onto the deck like a fallen star. The men collapsed around it, panting, blinking salt from their eyes. One of them whispered, "I thought it would take us." Another laughed, but the sound cracked halfway through. And still, they stood together. They had won, but not without cost. By the time the last harpoon had been unhooked and the ropes coiled, the storm had passed. Only a soft drizzle remained, tapping gently on metal like the breath of something tired. The Leviathan sprawled across the deck, still glistening, steam rising from its wounds as the ocean air cooled it. Its gills no longer flared. Its eye, half-lidded and glassy, reflected nothing now. No threat, no fury, no memory. The men stood around it, not speaking, just looking, some with awe, some with quiet grief. It wasn't mourning, not exactly. But when something so fierce, so old, is finally stilled, even warriors feel it. One man crouched and placed his hand on its flank, rough, cold, and scaly. Another wiped blood from his face, not knowing whose it was. They had pulled a monster from the deep, but it hadn't come easily. Nothing out here ever does. Behind them, the winch gave a final groan as it wound down, the engine humming low, finally allowed to rest. The gulls returned, circling above with cautious curiosity. Far off, the sea was calm again, the horizon burning red with the first hints of sunset. The captain stepped out onto the deck, looked at the fish, then the men, and gave a single nod. Nothing else needed to be said. They began to clean hands automatic, minds still halfway underwater. They had survived, again. And survival out here wasn't just a matter of strength, it was a matter of resolve, of understanding the rhythm of the sea, and accepting that it never truly gives, only lends. And today, it had lent them something unforgettable. Even after the blood was scrubbed from the deck and the harpoon stowed, the silence that followed held weight. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that lingers after a storm, when nature and man have exchanged their blows, and both sides breathe. The men gathered near the bow, where the ocean stretched endlessly, soft now, like a beast at rest. A few sat on overturned buckets, their backs curved, not from defeat, but from the kind of exhaustion earned only through survival. One held a tin mug of coffee, the steam rising between his fingers like a fragile flag of peace. Another leaned against the rail, eyes lost in the horizon, where sea and sky bled into a single line. No one spoke about the fish, not directly. They didn't need to. The marks were there, on their hands, on the cables, in the dents, on the hull. The story had been written in salt, sweat, and silence. One man, the youngest, traced a deep cut on his palm with his thumb. He didn't smile, but his chest rose a little higher. He belonged now, not just to the crew, but to the sea. The ship creaked gently, wood and steel easing into calm. A gull landed on the mast, squawked once, then took off. The wind had changed, cooler now, brushing through the iron railings like a whisper. The storm was over, but its memory would stay, etched into the eyes of every man who stood on that deck. They knew they had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back. Morning would come soon. Even now, just beyond the darkness, a faint blue thread was weaving across the horizon. The sea, as if knowing had gone still again, its rage folded back into its depths. On deck, the fishermen moved slowly, packing gear, tying down nets, coiling rope with a reverence not for the tools themselves, but for what they had endured. The beast, the largest grouper any of them had ever seen, lay secured in the hold, its weight shifting with the waves. But their focus was no longer on what they'd caught, it was on what waited next. For out here, glory is not a final chapter, it's a cycle, one born with every sonar pulse, every shadow beneath the waves. The men knew it, their bodies knew it. Pain, fatigue, hunger, they were temporary, but what they carried back to shore was something more lasting. Pride, forged not from victory alone, but from daring to face what most would run from. As the iron ship turned its nose toward home, the youngest of them stood at the stern, watching the dark line of ocean disappear into dawn. He wasn't thinking about sleep or warmth or metals. He was thinking about tomorrow, when they'd cast out again, when the sea would rise once more to test them, and when, without question, they'd answer. Because this wasn't just fishing. This was the echo of something older than maps, deeper than fear. This was the tale of men who hunt giants, not for gold, but for the right to say, "We were there. We pulled monsters from the deep, and we'll do it again."